watching the riots, watching the news, watching the election. I was able to cut through a lot of that news, and I didn't like it. I said, in today's times, we can do it better. Mark Naughton, I'm just a citizen. People want to be heard, not told. They want to be heard. All right, Seth, tell me about your wall here.
I guess my favorite one is Lincoln's Road to the White House, where he failed in business in 1831, defeated for the legislature 1832, had a nervous breakdown 1836, defeated for Speaker of the House in 1838, ran for Congress, but he was defeated when he opposed the Mexican War, defeated for the Senate, defeated for Vice President 1856, then elected President of the United States in 1860 and saved the country. So obviously Abraham Lincoln is a great hero of mine.
That's wonderful. Yeah, not taking the L, just keep fighting, right?
So when you take when you hear that term thrown around, you're a loser. Yeah, I'll be a loser, just like Abraham Lincoln. Okay. I'd be happy with that.
Okay, I like it.
And of course that shows my roots when I was in Atlantic City, and I had been very active. As you could see, I was in the Miss America pageant parade when they had the parade, and I had when my kids were young. And then tragically, I couldn't send my kids to my own elementary school that I went to because it just wasn't the same. It had become saturated with that multiculturalism, where instead of teaching people to learn English, to embrace the American culture, it was just a babble of really no learning, people not even speaking English. And I remember as a Jewish kid in that same elementary school, we had the Lord's Prayer, we read a psalm, we had Christmas carols at Christmas, we made Easter baskets for Easter, and I thought it was so great to embrace a common American culture where everybody was welcome. And now, of course, the people who are running our schools and colleges are doing everything they can to destroy that culture.
Sometimes I just wonder why does the left get all the great words? Liberal, progressive, inclusive, like those. I like those words. I'm into those words.
Absolutely. The fact is, because that's what they're good at, and I laugh about it because I grew up again in the '60s where we had a very popular cartoon called Rocky and Bullwinkle, and the villains of that piece were Boris and Natasha, the two communists, and the communists were portrayed as bumbling idiots who were no threat to anybody, and we laughed at them. But as you see how these techniques are used, communists may be horrible at running economies, running countries, but they are brilliant in manipulating democracy and propaganda, and that's exactly what they do. They use these words. For example, apartheid is evil because it separates the races in South Africa, but self-determination if you're trying to overthrow a government somewhere else. So whites living in Africa have to get thrown out of Africa, but immigrants from all over the world have to come to America. That it's evil to be white. So they use these words as weapons, and Americans were always very good-natured and never saw that, and that's why I think we were so surprised and why so much damage has been done to our country so quickly, because we don't understand the power of words and how by using words in a certain way, you win arguments just by using the right words. And George Orwell wrote a whole book, 1984, about newspeak and how language and words are used to manipulate people.
Seth, thanks for being on. Why don't you take a minute and tell the viewers who you are and what you're about?
Well, I'm a product of Atlantic City. Grew up when America was great, when Atlantic City was great. It was a remarkable town, great place to grow up. And what I've learned growing up is that whatever happens to America happens to Atlantic City first. Every good, bad, ugly trend seems to have started in Atlantic City. And it was just an amazing place. It was an interracial, intercultural, multicultural town. And I learned a lot of lessons there. And many people just know it from Boardwalk Empire. But there's a fantastic story, a backstory behind Boardwalk Empire. It wasn't a case of just a corrupt political machine. It was really about, in a way, protecting liberty, because we were a town where people came to do what they wanted to do. people of all races, all nationalities. We had a 25% black population back in the early 1900s. And it was boundless opportunity based on people being free to do what you wanted to do. There were no zoning laws, no planning commissions, no drug laws, no prostitution laws, no liquor laws, and people were free to do what they wanted, and they had a good time, and they built good lives for themselves. And this whole political struggle came in when you had this progressive movement that thought that people were too stupid to know what they really wanted, and that the government had to fix things for them. And the guy who was really the main proponent of this so-called progressive movement was Woodrow Wilson, who was governor of New Jersey, later became president of the United States. And his idea was you couldn't have liquor, you couldn't have drugs, you couldn't have any of these things. You couldn't build what you wanted to do because, again, the presumption that people were too dumb to know what they really wanted or what was really good for them. And that's what started that whole conflict. Because whenever the state would come up with these rules telling people they couldn't do these things, you had this obscure sheriff called Enoch Johnson, or Nucky Johnson, and whenever the state would start arresting people for liquor laws or drug laws or doing this wrong or that wrong, in those days the sheriffs picked the juries and the grand juries. And so, for example, if the state police were locking up people for drinking liquor on a Sunday, he would make sure that only bar owners would be on a grand jury and everything would get dismissed. So that's how our tradition of, maybe you call it political corruption, started. It was really started because the Republican leader, Nucky Johnson, understood that people will do what they want to do. And if you make laws to prevent that or to stop that, people will find a way to do what they want to do. And I really grew up in that atmosphere. So therefore it's so ridiculous when Democrats are saying I'm anti-black, I'm anti-gay, I'm anti-this, I'm a bigot or whatever. Having lived my entire life in this town where there was equal opportunity for anyone, it's absolutely ridiculous. And that was proven when I ran for Congress, when the Democrats tried to paint me in this corner, and yet the people who knew me understood what I was about. We were all part of the same town, and they said Grossman did, quote, better than expected. Well, right. I did better than they expected, but certainly not better than anyone who knew me or grew up with me did. So after being in politics for a while, I formed a group called libertyandprosperity.com, and in which all these ideas of the value of liberty, the value of Constitution, the value of not judging people by what group you're in or what your daddy did or grandfather did, that was the heart of America, and Atlantic City was proof of that.
So it sounds like where we're at is the regulation, the overregulation, the picking the demographics. How is that affecting our current political issues, as in today? Where are we going with this today? It's poisoning us today because what we have for the past, I'd say, 3 generations, our schools have been hijacked by people who I won't be ashamed to call them communists, socialists, leftists, whatever label you want to do. They are determined to ruin this country so they can take over. And they're ruining this country by giving our children, for 3 generations, this fake image of what America was like. I mean, if I would talk to a typical suburban high school student today and talk about life in the 50s, they would think that blacks were being lynched on Atlantic Avenue. They would think that that gay people were getting beaten up on the boardwalk. When the truth is, you had places called Snake Alley, New York Avenue, where gays lived the lives that they wanted to, where blacks were part of the day-to-day life. You had the Club Harlem. You had a city where anybody of any race or ethnic group could walk in any neighborhood day and night, walk barefoot. That was the kind of town we had. And yet, if you would talk to any suburban high school student or college student today, they would think that blacks were being lynched on Atlantic Avenue, that gays were getting beaten up on a beach, and so in many ways, old-time Atlantic City people like me, we are conservatives. We have become
Make America Great Trump Republicans because we're like Holocaust survivors. We know how good America was because we lived there. We know that you had this good life. And if you look at almost any of these Facebook sites, anyone who grew up in Atlantic City, anyone who lived in Atlantic City, everybody's talking about how marvelous it was in Atlantic City. And really, there was nothing special about Atlantic City. Atlantic City was just a typical city in the 1950s and 60s. And we were moving so close to making, actually perfecting our country. And suddenly in the 1960s, something happens that completely undermines everything. And that's what we have to be talking about that nobody wants to talk about.
What was it? What was it in the 60s that changed?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say that, but when I was in high school, I actually won a prize for denouncing the John Birch Society in a speech contest. Now looking back, I could really see we were in a Cold War, and what you had this propaganda campaign to teach Americans very subtly, very slowly, that we thought we had a great democracy, we thought we had opportunity, but we were really racist, we were really unfair, we were really hateful. And little by little, those people who believed that propaganda got to be our teachers, got to be our editors of our papers, got to run our Hollywood movies. And then you see these hateful Hollywood movies. Almost every Hollywood movie since the 1980s has in some way portrayed America as being a hateful and evil place. And after 3 generations of that, with nobody pushing back, you now have half the country thinks that America needs fundamental change because we were this hateful, horrible, evil place responsible for all the war, hatred, and misery and oppression in the world. And it's a total lie. And the people who know it's a total lie are anyone over the age of 50, which is why I think the Democrats and the socialists or leftists or whatever you want to call them are demonizing us and saying our opinions have no value.
What's their end goal?
Well, their end goal, and there's a fella, a defector from the old communist Russia, did this interview in 1985. He said their end goal is to think that they're going to be running things. And Bezmenov had a word for them. He called them useful idiots. He said they want to destroy America because they think that after they destroy America, they're going to be running things. But if anyone has any sense of history, they'll see that whenever you have these people get used to destroy a country, and then a new strong person takes over, the first person to be eliminated and thrown in jail are these useful idiots who spent their whole careers undermining the country. So that's the problem. They're very narrow-minded. They're focused on the emotion, the evil of tearing something down. But you're absolutely right. They have no plan as to what would replace what they want to tear down, other than they feel that they'll be important, that they'll be running things, and it's a very hard thing, to fight. That people think that I'm important, and I'm going to be more important if I destroy this country, because then I don't have to spend years building up a business. I just have my revolution. I win an election, and everybody's going to, I'm going to have all the money and the power. But it never ever works that way. So
specifically, what's happening in front of us right now that's on that trajectory where it's progressive, it's leftist, it's anti the sunny days that you're describing in the 50s.
Yeah, well, you just go to Stockton University, where and for Black History Month, what the president of the college announced is that they are going to infuse, in his words, race and racial justice into every area of campus life, every class, every topic, every subject, including athletics. And they're going to train students to be, quote, anti-racist. Now, what is anti-racist? You see, the whole vocabulary has changed. We're not even talking the same word. When I grew up, I thought racist means that you believe that people have different qualities or different character or different intelligence based on their race. and that certain races are inferior or superior to certain other races.
So what do they say?
And that is absolutely outrageous. I never believed that, and hardly any American that I know ever believed that. But right now what they're saying is if someone has a political agenda and they happen to be black, or they happen to be gay, or they happen to be some Islamic or some minority, and if you oppose them, then you're racist because you're opposing somebody who happens to be of a different race, and that's just a horrible thing. And what was ironic, after denouncing racism at Stockton University and saying we're going to teach every student in every class, in every subject, every course, every major, that whatever field they're dealing with is tainted by racism, and to teach you not to be racist. At the same time, they're saying they have a professor of Africana Studies is saying that she thinks it's very important for all black students to take courses with black professors and for black professors to reach out to black students. In other words, they're promoting the very kind of racism that they say they're against. So it's really what the whole thing is. It's absurd. And again, what the Romans had a term for it, a Latin word called cui bono, C-U-I-B-O-N-O. Who benefits? Who benefits from having people fighting with each other constantly over nothing? And the answer is people who want to destroy a country and then be running it afterwards.
So, other than the Stockton issue, it sounds like you're very specific on that professor and everything. I'm just sitting here wondering, how is that not segregation? If you're sitting here saying only black students should see the black professors, are we going backwards? Is that segregation?
Oh, sure we are. In fact, that whole idea of using every discipline, every area of life to promote a political doctrine, the Nazis actually invented a word for it. They called it in the 1930s Gleichschaltung, which means synchronize or all pull together. And what that meant is that in Nazi Germany, when the National Socialists, you do know that Nazi is an abbreviation for National Socialist. When they took over, what they said is you could be taking a mathematics course and it'll talk about how Jews are no good. You could be taking an art history course and they'll talk about how Jews are no good. You could be on a chess team and they will somehow show that Jews are no good. And so within 20 or 30 years, or rather 2 or 3 years, in Germany, every single area of life was promoting this hateful ideology. And here you had the president of Stockton University said that's the official policy of our college right now.
Are the schools, is the professors, is the president of the college, are they outside their lane by even trying to educate on quote unquote social justice? Are they should it not even be taught?
No, they have completely taken over. Just to show how far this has gone, in the last election, right here in Margate, you had a 6-year-old kid came back from first grade in this Margate suburban Republican town, and they had a mock election. And she tells her Republican mom, yeah, we had a class election. And mom said, who'd you vote for? Oh, we all voted for Biden. Oh yeah? Why did you pick Biden? Well, we all know that Trump makes bad decisions. So this is a quote from a 6-year-old in first grade. So you could just see that the teachers have been indoctrinated, or indoctrinating the kids. And that's why, if it sounds like I'm sort of not on the focus, you're probably concerned about issues, marijuana, transgender, all these other issues. They all have one purpose, and the purpose is to divide us, to get us fighting over nothing, to make us angry, to make us resentful, to make us blame whatever unhappiness we have in our lives is somebody else's fault. And the American dream was always just the opposite. If in America, for the America that we had for 300-400 years, if you don't like your job, what you do, you get training, you save your money, you borrow money from relatives, you make changes in your own life.
Whoa.
But now we're just have this attitude that if something's wrong with your life, just blame it on somebody else.
Well, do you think certain demographics are oppressed in America?
No, not today. And what I'm noticing also, something very similar in Germany, that black history is now repeating German history. And in Germany, we always think of the Germans as a big, powerful nation with strong stormtroopers pushing everybody else around. But in their own minds, you see, the Germans didn't think of themselves that way, because they were looking at their past history, where 100 years before, the Germans were divided in these weak little states, and they were surrounded by powerful neighbors like England and France. So what they were doing is, even though they were strong and powerful, their mind was 100 years before, and they were so seething over this past injustice that of being bullied around, they became bullied themselves. And that's what has happened in our black and minority communities today. Instead of taking advantage of the opportunities that they have. And frankly, my grandparents and every family in America faced this at one time. I'm Jewish. My grandfather went to engineering school for 4 years, couldn't get a job because they didn't take Jews as engineers. So he went to dental school and he built up a neighborhood practice, and then his kids got to be accepted. In other words, the thing about America is not that we never had discrimination, not that we never had injustice, but that we had a constitution and laws that protected you and let you overcome that. And of course, the only place you did not have that was in the white Democrat South, where you actually had Confederates who used murder and terror and lynching to kill not just blacks, but Republicans. And so you had something called the Great Migration, in which millions of blacks left the South and achieved incredible success. Like most people in Atlantic City don't even know that we had a multimillionaire called Ceres Spencer Washington. Black woman set up a beauty shop on Baltic Avenue in Atlantic City, and she was upset because there were no beauty products for black skin or black hair. So she went to Columbia University, took courses, developed her own products, and became a multimillionaire within 5 or 6 years. You have a town called Whitesboro in Cape May County, where that's where Oprah Winfrey's boyfriend comes from. That was founded by a guy called George White, who again became wealthy and powerful, and told blacks that if you face discrimination in the South, move to the North, build a better life for yourself. We have a place in Egg Harbor Township called McKee City, named after John McKee. Became a multimillionaire, black guy, started as a waiter in a Philadelphia restaurant. So what I'm saying is, if these opportunities were there, when you had much more prejudice than you have now, with all of these affirmative action programs, you would think that if people would, minorities and blacks would follow the same discipline and planning that their grandparents did, they'd be better off. And
Seth, you brought up affirmative action. I'm sitting here and I go, it's very popular. Everyone says, especially with cops, the conversation about cops, they say, hey, the force should reflect the community. It should reflect the demographics. X percentage of the town is black. X percentage of the cops should be black. And that's a wildly popular opinion. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, well, how come we don't do that in sports? If you want a winning team, do you pick a racial balance?
Well, it's not fair. It's not fair. They've been held down. What do you think? They didn't have the same educational opportunities.
Well, weren't blacks held down in sports as well? Why do you think the sports teams took the Jackie Robinson? Don't you think? And why did they take more and more minorities? Was it because they wanted social justice, or was it because they wanted to win ball games? So I think if we hire people who either don't want a particular job, or because they don't have talent in that particular job, and we give them the job anyway because of their color of their skin, and we deny people who are better motivated, better qualified, have better character, what you do is you create permanent injustice instead of temporary injustice.
Isn't that what the universities already do? I mean, it's...
Right, and that is what made me famous when I ran for Congress, because as soon as I ran for Congress and I got the nomination, I made the front page of the Philadelphia Daily News for saying diversity is a bunch of crap and un-American. And they tried to paint me as this caveman who didn't want minorities to participate in America. But what I meant was diversity as a way to decide who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets a scholarship. It is a bunch of crap. It is un-American, and it's tearing this country apart. Yeah, I mean, transgender issue. Why is that an issue? I mean,
well, aren't they treated unfairly? They were not allowed in the military under President Trump, and President Biden. One of his first executive orders is equality. He wants equality for them. He doesn't want them discriminated against.
Look, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist, but I think the transgender issue is a lot deeper and more complicated than the Civil Rights Act, because what the presumption of it is, if I am born with certain physical characteristics, and by the way, being Jewish, I did go through this. I'm Jewish. My nose is too big. I'm unhappy because I want to get a nose job to make myself look better. I want plastic surgery. I want this or that. Too often, when people are unhappy, and instead of looking into why they're really unhappy or what can make them happier, they blame other things like my nose is too big, or I wish I were white, I wish I were black, I'm a man but I wish I were a woman. And I think that before we treat transgender as a civil rights issue, I think we have to look more into the science and the psychology behind it. Because what we are doing is, if we say that, if I say I'm a cat, I was born in a man's body but I'm really a cat, you have to call me a cat. I mean, we're getting to the point of being ridiculous. And sure, if somebody feels that strongly, that they want to biologically change their appearance or they want to change their chromosomes, it's a free country where we recognize the unalienable rights of each individual to do whatever thing they want to do. But that doesn't mean that everybody else has to buy into it. In other words, so if you want to be transgender, fine. You're a biological male, and you take some chromosomes that make you appear to be female in certain ways, but does that give you a right to compete in women's sports and win all these championships that a woman's physical body can't handle? I'm not so sure. And how do you know what's inside of a person? So it's a complicated issue, but the Democrats want to make it a simple, they take all these complicated issues and want to say if you either ignorant or you're tolerant. You're either progressive or you're Neanderthal. And I think that Americans were always good at being sensible and reasonable and looking at all sides of an issue, and we're not doing that anymore. We're shutting off debate. We're like, if I would want to say what I'm just saying to you, I can't say that at Stockton College. I can't say that in a classroom. I would never get hired to be a professor, and that's what's tearing our country apart.
Border. What's going on the border? The wall is not complete. There's some holes in the wall. We're seeing a surge up to 3x from just back in January when we still had President Trump.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, what's going on is we see this contradiction. We are told that America is this evil, rotten, racist, intolerant place that persecutes blacks and minorities and hates everybody and is violent and evil. And yet everybody in the world wants to come live here. Well, why is that?
The one thing I find funny is I always bring this up as I travel the world and I see different places and I come back to America, then I notice that all the people who have the biggest criticism and point to racism and how horrible we are, they usually have never left the country. Do you notice that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you think there's racism because somebody called you a slur, when you were 10 years old, and you say, oh, what a racist country there is. I mean, that means you haven't been to a country where people actually just beat you up on the street, where people shoot you, kill you, where you'll never have a chance. I mean, we are the most open, tolerant, equal opportunity country in the world. But to go back to what you said, what's the real problem with immigration? The fact is that the name of our group is called Liberty and Prosperity. When I was a college professor, I would, and maybe this is why I was not, invited to continue teaching at the college, but I would say let's examine why North America was rich and wealthy and South America and Central America was miserable, because the Spanish got to America first. They got the good part of America. They got the part of America that had the gold and the silver and the trade routes to the east. They had fabulous riches that Spain did. And what happened to the people who came to North America? Well, the Spanish got there first. We got the leftovers. So you couldn't make any money in America unless you worked hard and saved your money and used your mind. So
is it still that way?
What?
Is it still that way? You work hard, or is there safety nets? Is there programs? Is it becoming so socialist? Is it capping Americans?
Yeah, well, that's what happened. So the motto of New Jersey is liberty and prosperity, meaning if you have the liberty, the freedom to make good choices or bad choices, and you get rewarded if you make good choices. You should have consequences if you make bad choices. People get smarter, people work harder, people are more understanding of others, people are blaming themselves for things they do wrong instead of others. You just have a happier, more prosperous place, as opposed to in Latin America, where the tradition was, if you want something, you have to take it from somebody else. That's a greedy, selfish, angry culture. We have a wonderful culture, so the way to end the problem at the border is not to destroy America, but to make other countries more like America by giving them constitutions, by giving them cultures that embrace freedom and equal opportunity.
COVID, we're a year into the lockdown in America. It was a 2-week. The government sold it to us 2 weeks. Everybody bought it. It was Netflix. Everybody stayed at home, worked from home. It was a vacation. And here we are, a year later. We've only seen states recently, Texas and Mississippi, open up without restrictions. New Jersey still has restrictions. What are your thoughts?
Well, ironically, this was a very politically handled epidemic, because when it first started, the first country that was exposed to this was Taiwan, which is called Free China, non-communist China. And what they did, as soon as they saw the first case in Wuhan, they sent people there, realized how contagious it was, and they shut the travel ban. They started their travel ban like in early January. They took everybody's temperature. They told everyone in their households to take their families' temperatures, and they nipped that epidemic in the bud immediately. And had we done what Taiwan did, we would have been in the, we would have avoided hundreds of thousands of deaths, in my opinion. But you'll notice that nobody even mentioned the word Taiwan. And why was that? With all these coronavirus briefings, even President Trump never even mentioned the word Taiwan, even though they're recognized as the most successful country in stopping this disease. And the answer is obvious, because communist China hates Taiwan, doesn't recognize Taiwan, and wants to destroy Taiwan. And now you see the control that the Chinese Communist Party has over the media, over Hollywood, over the celebrities, over government. The fact that the most successful country in the world that could have prevented all of this, they were not even mentioned.
Well, domestically, where are we at today?
Well,
in America, here.
What we have is, when you have a disease like that, you have two choices. You have to nip it in the bud and stop it early. But when you fail to stop it early, then there's no way to stop it until most of the country has immunity. About 30 or 40% has what they call the herd immunity. And there are only two ways to get the herd immunity: to either have a vaccine, so that that if you get the disease, you will not get sick or pass it on, or if you already have it and recover from it. And once it was too late to stop that disease in the early stages, then President Trump was right that the only solution was to get a vaccine at warp speed, which he did. But if you study what's happening with the disease, and I have a brother in Spain, so I see what's going on in Europe. They used to say Europe was the big success. No, Europe was not the success. The masks, the social distance, all that stuff delays the transmission of the disease. It postpones the infections. It postpones the deaths. But just like when you have a leaky boat, it's not going to come to an end until you reach that equilibrium. And now we are coming very close to that, because I'd say in most of the countries, such as in Florida, probably 20 to 30% have gotten the disease. Probably 10 to 20% have gotten the vaccination. So probably about half of Florida's population is now immune, and you see the daily infections dropped from 11,000 to 8,000 to 5,000, and I think they're about 3,000 now.
So a little pivot on that. So liberty and prosperity. You're an attorney. I think we've seen in the past year a record number of federal and state executive orders signed. It doesn't seem like whether you talk election, whether you talk business, okay, shutting businesses down, mandatory masks, citations, okay. Where do you come at that? You're a professional. You read law. Or is it an overreach?
One of the reasons we made so many bad decisions with the coronavirus is we took our Constitution and threw it in the trash. Emergency, when Governor Murphy and the other governors issued their emergency orders, and they issued them for 30 days, there's a reason. Governors made some really horrible decisions, like putting infected patients into nursing homes, closing businesses, making rules that are causing people to go into depression and suicide. Just horrible, horrible decisions, because these bad decisions were not discussed, they were not debated. They were just made by unknown experts based on unknown data with no discussion or debate. And we have constitutions. And Constitution says if anything is done to interfere with people's freedom and liberty, there has to be a process, an open process with open discussion. That's why the emergency laws would give the governors power to make emergency decrees for 30 days. Why 30 days? Because it takes 30 days to have the legislature meet, to have discussion, debate. But what they did is, after their 30-day emergency ended, they declared another 30 days, and another 30 days, just like, and I know you're not supposed to mention this, just like Hitler did with his emergency decrees, except even Hitler went to the legislature to get permission to extend his emergency decree. So whenever, again, we have our motto, liberty and prosperity. Whenever you destroy liberty to try to make people happier or more prosperous, you end up with neither liberty nor prosperity. And that's exactly what happened. We trashed our Constitution. We trashed our whole idea of individual liberty. We trashed our idea of trusting ordinary citizens to make what we used to say in the 60s, to make the most important decisions affecting their own lives. We just trashed it. And it did not make our country a better place, did not make us a healthier place. In fact, it made us more unhealthy, more angry, more psychotic. And we've got to get back to normal.
How do we get back to normal? And it's not just COVID. How do we get back to normal? How do we fall back on the Constitution, on rights? If everything what you're saying is true, how do we go back to the better time?
Well, we have to understand that it took us 50 to 60 years to get to where we are now. And I tell my fellow conservatives, if you think you're going to change 50 years of damage to this country by sending off an angry email, or trying to win an election, or send a letter to a politician, you're not living in reality. Unfortunately, most Americans, conservative and so-called progressive, they think that life is like watching a TV program. You don't like the channel, so you pick up the remote and you push a button, and everything's going to be different. No, it took 60 years for us to get to where we are today. It's going to take at least 60 years to get out. So I'm spending my time, most of my time, talking to my children, getting my kids and getting my grandchildren out of public schools, away from that indoctrination. Turn off the darn TV. Don't go to the movies. Have them read books. And by the way, the one option that we didn't have with our public schools, they never said, okay, kids, you can't go to school today, so why not read a book and write about the book, and then your teacher will review your writing about the book. Think of how that would have solved a whole lot of problems and continued learning. So basically, we have to disengage from this mass internet virtual society that's tearing our country apart and really rebuild America. At one time, people who felt like me, we called ourselves the silent majority, but we're not. We're a persecuted minority right now, and it's not a matter of saving America. It's a matter of we've lost America. How do we rebuild what we once had from scratch? And it starts from our children and our grandchildren and our nieces and our nephews.
Well said. You're obviously an educated man. You speak very, very well. You've answered all the questions today. Do you have any thoughts? Where are you going with this? Do you have any announcements you'd like to make to the people?
Well, I urge everyone to go to our website, libertyandprosperity.com. And of course, I'm running for state senate. Now, why am I running for state senate? Because when I speak the ideas that I've just been speaking about just now, those are considered right-wing, radical, extreme. And we actually had our New Jersey Attorney General who announced after 2 Jews were murdered in Jersey City and another Jew was murdered in Muncie, New York, because they were Jewish and because they were white. And then we have our Attorney General go on a speaking tour around the state talking about how the biggest danger to New Jersey are white supremacist extremists. You could see what an upside down world we live in. So many people, especially establishment Republicans, think I would be a horrible candidate for state senate because I'm just have these fringe beliefs. So the main reason I'm running is to show that there's nothing fringe about my beliefs. They're very mainstream, they're very productive, and the only way I can get the political elites to recognize that is to go out and run for office and win the darn election. Then they'll pay attention. Until then, we're stuck in the margins.
Well, Seth, thanks for being on the show.
All right, thank you.
That's very simple. How the YouTube algorithm works is you have to share. You got to share it, you got to share it. Likes are good, you got to share it. Thanks.